It's currently midnight, and this all went down about 45 minutes ago. My brother decided to make a late-night run to the grocery store, but on his way back, his tire exploded, so he called my dad to come pick him up from the gas station that he managed to pull into. There are some sketchy folk around that area, so my dad suggested we just change the tire and escort him home to make sure that some donut didn't go flat too, because it's fairly old. My dad calls me and asks me to bring me tools and a jack so we can change the tire. After the donut is on, my dad goes in front and my brother follows, and of course, I follow behind my brother. We live on a back road off of a back road. Not many houses, lots of farmland, and not much traffic, with lots of deer at night, so my dad and I turned on our LEDs that we use when we go off-roading, when we go to our roads so we could see deer well before they were a hazard. The fields stretch about a quarter mile from the road on either side, and the lights are bright enough so that I can just barely see the tree line past the fields. We get up to a bend in the road where a small patch of woods separates the field from the house beside it, and I see glowing eyes to my left about 15 feet away from the patch of woods on the field side. There were lots of deer out, so I was already on high alert. I slowed down and kept an eye on it. This thing, whatever I was looking at, had arms. It had a humanoid shape, a humanoid head. It was not far from the road, so it was lit up pretty bright. I have no doubts in my mind about what I saw. I was going about 15 miles an hour. It wasn't just a quick glimpse either. I looked at it for at least 30 seconds before it was out of view. Once I realized that I had never seen anything like what I was seeing, I started honking my horn and pointing so that my brother and dad in front of me would look. But by then, they had already passed by the patch of woods and could not see it. I would guess it was maybe around 6 to 7 feet tall when standing, but it appeared to be either hunched over or kneeling on the ground. It was resting one elbow on something, and the other arm was straight. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Nosferatu, but its head and face looked very similar to Nosferatu's. It looked gaunt and pale, and even had pointed ears and glowing eyes. I'm sure the glow was because of the lumens I was shining at it, but at the least it tells me it's a nocturnal living creature. I live in North Carolina if that helps anyone in figuring out what this is. I'm very concerned because it wasn't far away from my home, and I've been hearing very strange noises at night the past few weeks. I took my puppy out to use the bathroom yesterday around 10 p.m., and I could hear something in the forest walking very slow. I know it wasn't a deer because the puppy was barking and it didn't run off. I didn't have a flashlight, so I just kept my gun out in case it was a predator and it tried to eat my puppy. It was snapping big sticks and it sounded heavy. I'm convinced it wasn't a bear because we don't live in bear country. We've never seen any bear around here and we go into the woods a lot. We also have a chain link fence all the way around our property line, including in the woods. We inspect it often and I walked the perimeter today and none of it was damaged. Whatever this is, it's agile and smart enough to climb and jump over a fence without noticeably damaging it. A few months ago, I also noticed a lot of scratches on the trees around my house. They were all no less than 7 foot off the ground, so in my mind that took a mountain lion out of the equation. If anyone finds this description familiar, please let me know. I'm fishing down at Catagon. It's on the Allegheny River in western Pennsylvania. So I parked at the top ramp going down to the river. Not a boat ramp, just one for backing four wheels down to the water. I go up and it's getting to be just about twilight when I could hear something coming down the hillside across from us. It's steep, but not too steep. Anyway, I hear it barreling down the hillside, but the brush is thick and really high. a better part of 12 feet. Now I'm waiting for a black bear to hop on the road, but it doesn't. It just stops in the middle of the last brush right beside the road. Thinking it was still a bear, I go ushering my friend and his 4-year-old daughter back down to the river. There's a bunch of rocks there from a baseball to a basketball size, so they can defend themselves. I'm still up at my car because I'm less than 5 feet from my door, and this brush is a good 30 feet away, so I know I can make it to my car and distract it with my horn and engine. And yet it never leaves the brush, just shakes it violently. I stand there about 5 minutes and I could see it make its way up the hill. I didn't realize it was pushing the trees around. About 20 feet tall, I'm sure I wasn't connecting anything because of my adrenaline. I'd never seen it. It was too dark by that point. I walk back down to the river and we're gathering up our stuff. It's starting to get way too creepy. We start packing up and I could hear a knocking coming from the hillside. I could see a group of people down the river from us, but they aren't near any trees. They're actually on an outcrop about 20 feet away from the tree line. This knocking is above us and slightly upriver, and even they had reacted to it, looking around and whatnot. I yelled to them, possibly being a bear, and they said they heard something coming down the hillside and seen my buddy running towards the water. They thanked us for the heads up. As soon as they thanked us, a rock came flying off the hillside in between us and them. We actually seen the rock hit the water. They jumped as I did. We really weren't expecting it. I turned around to see if my friend was up on the hill and was messing with us. As I turned, he was just a few feet behind me, holding his daughter, and both were white as ghosts. None of us were expecting that. I decided to reach down and grab a rock and carried it with me just in case it got real. 3 more times we heard these rocks hitting the water, and I had just had enough. Our sight was all cleaned, and I took it as perfect time to retaliate. But I knew where they were being thrown from. That damn brush, so I chucked it. I knew there wasn't any trees around, and I figured if I threw it, it would probably just blow right through it. But it didn't. It made a sound like someone who was beating their chest, and it rolled back towards me. I actually heard whatever I hit get the wind knocked out of it, and it hit the hillside. It takes off down the road towards the other group. They start screaming, and I meant a life being threatened, utter terror scream, and start throwing whatever they could grab at it. I'm just standing there, bewildered and watching them scatter. Few went into the water, and the rest ran towards me. All of a sudden, someone yells, "Get in the truck!" Now they took off to their truck, and I mean it when they said they left everything. Nobody grabbed anything, and they took off. I'll never forget their screams. I ran back up the hill and hopped in my car. My buddy ran up with his daughter right after they started shouting. He was crying, and I've known this man for 20 years, and I could count on one hand how many times I've seen him cry. I started up my car and we high-tailed it out of there. Never seen what it was, but I put everything together later that night. It's been 5 years since it happened, and he absolutely refuses to go down there. Damn shame too, because it's an amazing catfish spot. I am in a part of North Dakota. An unlikely place, I know, but there's this one specific area on the outskirts that I always get a bad vibe from. One day, we were smoking there, and my friend thought he saw something creeping up. I didn't see anything, but from what I heard, it was large and moving very slowly. Everyone in the group booked it out, and one of my friends is native, and he swears he believed it was one. There are a lot of coyote around in that area, so I thought it was probably just that, since I didn't actually see anything. But another day, we were on the outskirts of this spot. It's a good smoke spot, so we were always around there. And in the tree near us, there was a giant owl. It was the first time I've ever seen one here, and for some reason, It gave a really bad vibe, and somehow looked off. That's really the only way I can explain it. The way it stood on the branch, facing away from us, with its head down, and its wing, or something like that, was very dark, so it was kind of hard to see, and we didn't stick around to look very long. So I had no idea, but some of my friends are thoroughly convinced. Ever since then, I found myself strangely drawn to that place, and find myself going there for no reason and sitting. I've heard they can control your mind to an extent, and am wondering if that's not what's going on. Any advice and opinions are welcome, but I'm certain that I did see a skinwalker or something. My grandparents have a cabin in a town in Pennsylvania, south of Scranton. Every summer, we usually go up for a few weeks as a family event. Ever since I was little. A few years ago, we decided to go in the winter because my family wanted to go skiing at some point. After we get there, the weird things start happening really quickly, and seemingly out of nowhere. The house was built in the 1920s, old brick and wooden. The doors are these giant, almost church-looking doors, and the style of home is very medieval, definitely just adding to the creepy vibes of the home. The first night was seemingly calm through the house, but whenever I went there, I always felt that there was something watching me, or something lurking through the halls. The first night I got up to go to the bathroom at around 3:10, which is also interesting, because I never get up to go to the bathroom back at home. Most nights I sleep right through it without ever waking up. There were 8 of us in the house. My 2 parents, my grandparents, my aunt, my uncle, and my male cousins, 2 of them of course. I went to one of the 3 main bathrooms, 4 in the house if you count the master. So when I heard someone was in there, I thought that was interesting, because I was one of the few people who doesn't share the bathroom. But I stood outside, waiting to make sure I did not intrude on anything going on in there, as my one cousin can get quite upset and I didn't want to bother him. What was extremely weird is the fact that whatever was in there didn't sound human in its movements. It dragged its feet around, or so it sounded, which made me nervous that it might be sick. I called out his name a few times. "Drew, are you okay in there? It's been a long time and I want to go to bed." Or something along those lines. A few seconds later, he comes out of his bedroom and asks me why I'm making so much noise. Tells me he's trying to sleep and slams the door behind him. Before I could freak out, he had already shut the door, and I was too scared to even yell back to him. I never realized before that the door wasn't even locked in the first place, which made me feel even more uneasy. Between the banter, I never realized that the sounds had stopped, and it didn't seem like anybody was in the bathroom anymore. I still even tell myself this was just my imagination, but I'm not known for sleepwalking or having any type of sleep disorder. I decided to just open the door, brushing it off as my too vivid imagination. When I opened the door, it looked like nothing strange had happened in there. But when I was washing my hands, I realized the window was open, and I froze, thinking somebody had broken into the house. But this was on the second story, with nothing to climb up on, making it almost impossible to climb up there, unless of course you had a ladder, but obviously there was none. The next day, nothing happened in the daytime, making it seem more to me that it was just a figment of my imagination than reality. But that night, I had to let the dog out. She is elderly and never really barks much, nor does she run fast. So this definitely is a case for concern, I thought. When I let her out, she bolted to the edge of the woods and vanished inside of them. I tried to follow her barking, but honestly, I was too scared to go into the woods past the tree line. When I finally got her to walk back, her back legs seemed off. Almost like a person pretending to be a dog walking on the ground. Her eyes were also off. They looked human-like, not her usual dark almond eyes. I freaked out and ran back inside without her. When I got inside, she was sitting, panting by the door, so she must have ran back in when I was yelling into the woods to try and find her. At this point, I didn't even want to leave that house, for fear of what was lurking in the woods. I had no previous information on skinwalkers or even knew what they were, so I had not yet connected the dots. The last night we stayed there was the most interesting and confusing turn of events that had happened. We had skied all day, so we went to bed quite early, around 9 to 10. I never fell asleep early, as I am usually a night owl myself. But I woke up around 12 a.m. to the sounds of my cousin Drew yelling outside. I woke up in a fog and tried to quickly rush to the door and open it. I didn't even take into consideration that the door was still locked from the inside. When I got outside, his voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions and echoing throughout the valley. I saw him by the cars, yelling, and when I started to go outside and call his name, he looked at me quickly. His eyes got huge and he ran into the woods, with a beckoning gesture for me to follow. I decided that that was definitely a bad idea, so I woke up his parents and he ended up being asleep in his room the entire time. Not now, until years later, did I even find out about skinwalkers from one of my Native American friends that I met in college. I still have no idea what was out there that weekend, and I haven't been back since. Before I tell my story, I figured I'd give a little backstory, of course. This happened a few years ago when I was living in Arizona in the middle of nowhere. I've since moved to the East Coast where there are no skinwalkers, thank God. I also had 2 German Shepherds and I still have them now. It was probably like the middle of June and sometimes I'd like to sleep with my window open. There was a screen so the window wasn't completely open. As I mentioned above, I have 2 German Shepherds. The older one, named Archer, slept on the floor in the bigger of the 2 dog beds, while the younger one, Nissa, tended to sleep on the bed with me. It had been around 2 in the morning when I jolted awake to the sound of Nissa growling at something outside. I looked around and Archer was nowhere to be found. I could have swore I'd let him back in the house before going to bed, but I was starting to think that I hadn't. I got closer to the window and looked out. I saw, or at least I thought I saw, Archer sitting outside. He is a rather large dog, so he's hard to miss. His appearance seemed a bit off. His back legs were up higher than his front legs, and his face was kind of strange. It was misshapen, and his nose looked longer than usual. I swear he's part wolf or something, so his muzzle is shorter than a normal German Shepherd. Nissa was still raising hell on my bed, so I tried to get her to stop by calling her name. That was the only thing I said in this short time. Just a quick, "Nissa!" and I turned back to the window. As I was looking out the window for what had felt like an eternity, having an intense stare down with Archer, I heard something coming back into my room. I turned and I saw Archer, who was looking up at me before he too started to growl outside at the thing. I was so stunned, the only thing that pulled me out of my haze was my own voice saying, "Nissa." Only I hadn't opened my mouth, nor was I speaking. The noise was coming from outside, from that thing that was outside my window. It almost sounded exactly like me, but there was something weird about the voice. It was almost crackly. The only way I can describe it is demonic. Needless to say, it scared me half to death. I slammed the window shut, shooed my dogs out of my room, and locked us in the bathroom until morning. I never had another experience after that, but to this day, I don't sleep with my window open anymore. This happened to my big brother when he was 15. We grew up on the Navajo reservation in Arizona. He was coming home from hanging out with a friend, and it was probably around 2, because his curfew was at 11, and my guardian had been up a while. I know this because she was talking to my mom in the kitchen and was super angry and loud, and I stayed up listening to them argue. When he came in, my guardian started to tell him off, but stopped because he was crying and talking in a hysterically frightened tone. Apparently, he came in the back gate and saw a coyote standing propped up on its hind legs against the back door, looking in the window. This wasn't so odd because it was Arizona, but when he came closer, the coyote turned its head to look at him, and as it did, it turned its whole body and started walking toward him on two legs, like a man. My brother swears it looked too big for a coyote as it came at him. He ran back out the gate and came around to the front door. To this day, he still cries talking about it. He's convinced that he encountered a skinwalker watching over our family. I also remember a wicked-looking eagle following me everywhere I went up there. So much so that as a kid, I talked to it and considered it one of my closest friends. And I know it sounds crazy, but as a kid, I remember telling it a really crappy joke I'd love and hearing laughter in my head. It was mid-January, a few years back in New York. I always loved the wintertime because of how cold and snowy everything was, but now I can't shake the feeling that there was more than just woods and snow out in a wintry forest. My family were upstate for the weekend to have some good bonding. I just wanted to explore the forest. I was allowed to go out into the woodland by myself as long as I stuck to the path. I was out there for about 18 minutes before I started noticing something. I looked around curiously to explore the forest's beauty when I noticed a very awkward-looking mound of snow, or at least I thought it was a mound. I looked at it closely, but it was far too far deep into the forest for me to see any real features. I thought nothing of it and decided to go back home. After 2 minutes, I felt I was being watched and kept on looking around me. I convinced myself it was just squirrels, and I kept on retreating. I smelled an awful stench to my left, causing me to jolt to my side, looking for whatever was out there. That same mound was there again, but it looked like something else. It had these twisted bones extending into the skin and had pale white skin. Under extinct alone, I started booking it back to the house. I heard something chase me from the woods. Luckily for me, I had multiple first place track finishes, and I was running a straight, which in the end allowed me to get back home quickly. I got back into the view of my house and sprinted up to the porch. I looked back into the forest and saw the rustling of leaves coming up to the edge. Then nothing. It just stopped and the stench faded away. For some reason, I never told anyone except my two best friends, who dismissed it as me messing with them. I hope I can find more answers for whatever it was I saw that day. About 4 years ago, on it's getting dark pretty early fall evening, around 7 p.m., my girlfriend and roommate and I were walking along some decommissioned Washington train tracks surrounded by woods on both sides. We love exploring little in-between areas, so this wasn't an uncommon event. We were about 5 miles into the tracks and woods and were considering heading back since it was just getting dark quickly, and none of us had flashlights. I suddenly got the sensation of almost nausea-inducing dread and looked at both my friends who were with me, and saw that they too were feeling something, wide-eyed and looking around. "Let's start heading back," I declare, and they all nod in silent agreement. Mind you, we were doing just fine a second ago, and to do this sort of thing all the time, so this sudden onset of fear was unusual and not something that we were prepared for or used to. Just as we were turned around, we all heard a strange sound that almost sounded like quieted thunder, metal hitting metal, that was coming from what sounded like off in the distance. As we whipped around to see what made the noise, a large white bird that I think was a white owl flew over our heads silently, flapping its wings and disappearing behind a tree that was a good 25 feet behind us. We all looked at each other, trying to make sense of what the hell we all just heard, and then started walking briskly back towards civilization. We heard what sounded like twigs snapping in the woods behind us, and my girlfriend and I turned around to see what made the noise. Peeking from behind the tree, the owl just flew behind, was what looked like an impossibly tall, ghost white, humanoid shape, with one hand on the tree trunk as it peered out from behind it. Before we can get a good look at its face, it quickly retreated back to behind the tree and out of our sight again. My girlfriend and I looked at each other, panicked. She opened her mouth to say something, and I told her, "Don't talk about it. We need to walk faster." My roommate looked at us confused and clearly scared by what I had just said, so I told him we need to probably run home at this point, which we did. I've told a few people this story, and honestly, no one believes me. What I saw was not the owl I had seen earlier. This being had a clear ghost white hand on the tree trunk, a neck and an upper body, and was tall. I'd say like 7 feet at least. Not tall enough to reach the branches of the tree though. I wish I could have made out the face. It was just so dark that the only reason I could see it was because of how white it was. First off, here's a little information about my backyard. It's pretty long and connects to an alleyway, and all the way at the back we have 2 poles that have been used for hanging clothes out to dry. They're probably about 6.5 feet tall. Connecting to my house in the yard is a porch. It's basically a room with 2 of the walls taken out and replaced with wire mesh. And now to the actual story. We live in a 2-bedroom house with me, my cousin, her son, my mom, and my grandfather. Me and my mom used to share a room until my cousin got pregnant, so she gave up our room so she wouldn't be sleeping on an uncomfortable couch. For a while, my mom and I slept in the living room, her on the couch and me on the air mattress. Up until 2 years ago, my mom reverted a room in our basement into a bedroom for me for Christmas so I can get some privacy. For myself, basically. My mom still sleeps in the living room on the couch, so she doesn't have any privacy, except for the back porch. So she pretty much just sits out there all day. It had to have been a year or 2 ago, in late summer, early fall, but she was sitting on the porch, as she usually does, and she looks out into the backyard and sees something standing in the alley, right behind our fence. It was pretty dark out, so she couldn't make out exactly what it looked like, but she said it had a human figure, was completely white and about the size of the poles we had in the yard. She told me that it hopped the fence no problem and started sprinting at her, like if it were running a marathon or something. It then got a couple feet away from the porch window, and then just disappeared. She said that she was so scared that she was completely frozen the entire time. She didn't move her body for a good 20 seconds because she was scared that if it saw her move, it was going to come back. She just kept moving her eyes to get them to adjust to the dark so she could see if there was anything still there outside. To come outside to the porch, you need to walk through the kitchen, and that's where I was. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she burst through the door and runs to the sink to get a knife. So now I'm panicking because I thought there was a murderer outside or something, and then she tells me what happened. We both stayed there for a good hour just looking out the kitchen window to see if this thing was still there. I haven't talked to her about all that then since, until now, mostly because I just forgot. I just wanted to share and see what people thought. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not good at writing these stories, and so I've tried my best. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Hello. I had an experience with one of these beings when I was around 8 years old, and it's really baffled me ever since. I'm glad others have seen them too, and look forward to reading other encounters. I was around 8 in the lounge at home. The lounge was at the end of a hallway, and at the other end of the hallway was a disabled bedroom shower for my dad. To the left and to the right was a door leading to the garage and garden. I can't remember what I was doing in the lounge at the time, but all of a sudden, I had a really powerful urge to look at the end of the hallway. We had recently bought a coat stand from a boot sale, and this was in the middle of the hallway now. As I stood there, I saw a human outline, but entirely filled with TV-like static. I remember little bits of yellow and blue in it, but it was mainly white, and it came out of the bedroom on the left and was in a running stance. But it was really weird because it was in slow motion, and it ran from the left to the back door on the right. As it ran, it grabbed the coat and pulled it down with it, and it fell to the floor. I was just standing there in shock and so scared. I ran to my sister and told her what had happened. When we went back to the hallway, the stand was still on the floor. That was the only time I saw it. I don't know why I saw it or why it pulled the stand down or what it was, but it was just so surreal. I don't know if this is a cryptid or if this is paranormal or what. I did have some other experiences in that house that were paranormal deemed, so maybe it was connected.